I don't think that I need to underpin the futility of the planned German invasion of the United Kingdom. Air domination proved too difficult, the seas were dominated by the UK, and while a minor landing might be possible, a blitz of England was mere fantasy. Operation Sealion was a pipe dream, and would and could never have actually been implemented, let alone been successful. Yet, what if the Germans tried it anyways? Let's be honest here, German leadership was not the most sane. Most of them were straight up crazy, megalomaniac, drug addicted, and fully convinced of the superiority or even invincibility of the German nation. Sure, Operation Sealion is a case where even German leadership realized this about themselves, but I don't think that it is crazy to suggest alternate histories exist where the German high command became singularly focused on implementing this invasion. Now for this, we do need to change the mind of the dictator, who was uncharacteristically pessimistic about the invasion. Strange behavior from the man who declared war on the US before it was necessary. Operation Sealion was first drawn up after the fall of Poland, and 4 main goals were set. The Royal Navy had to be sealed off from the south coast, primarily by mining the entrances of the English Channel. 2. The Royal Air Force must be completely destroyed. 3. All remaining Royal Navy ships in the area must be destroyed. And finally, British submarine actions must be made impossible. Now, out of these 4 objectives, Germany would realistically be able to achieve 0 of them. Now, luckily for us, after the fall of France, the objectives were lowered into something far more achievable. The RAF only had to be beaten down, not destroyed. The English Channel had to be swept of British mines, while German ones would still need to be placed. The French coast must be lined with heavy artillery, and finally, the Royal Navy would need to be distracted in the Mediterranean and North Sea. But still, these were not goals that the Germans could easily accomplish, and Admiral Raeder and the leader of the Air Force Göring were vocally opposed to this operation. So, in order to get the plan in motion, we need to get the dictator, Göring and Raeder all enthusiastic about the invasion, with planning beginning even before the fall of France. In terms of the actual invasion, I don't know enough about military matters, so I deferred myself to a thesis by Adarsh Bura of the University of York, who has wargamed Germany's potential invasion of Britain. We shall continue the 2 conclusions they reached in their thesis in this video. Now, their first counterfactual is the one where they explore the best realistic case scenario for the Germans. They achieve temporary air superiority over the English Channel, but fail to completely incapacitate the Royal Air Force. Importantly, Germany also loses a bunch of mine layers and only managed to install about 20% of the planned mines. Bura argues that these mines, which either deny the British ships access, slows them down, or forces them to suffer casualties, are perhaps the most important factor in German success. So in this scenario, Germany in their first wave only lands an average of 50 out of 120,000 planned forces. In the process, Britain only faces minor losses, mainly to their destroyer fleet, but none that can't be easily replenished from other navies. Germany, meanwhile, lost a bunch of their own service fleet and transports, and it is very likely that further German attempts to reinforce their now acquired beachheads would be a total disaster. Now, I hope that I don't need to tell you that 50,000 is not enough to overrun England. Just the Dunkirk evacuees number more than 300,000 soldiers. The Germans that landed are now simply stuck, undersupplied, and likely wiped out within a month. Would such a scenario have changed much overall? Well, probably not. The invasion would initially cause a decent worldwide shock, but then it turns into a massive propaganda victory for Britain. Germany lost a very large number of their surface fleet, leading it to have even less of a role in the remnants of the war. The German Air Force too would have lost significantly more than Britain would have, and the remaining bombardments of Britain would be lowered in intensity. Besides that though, the balance of the war has not been fundamentally altered. No German tanks were lost, and losing around 100,000 soldiers out of 3.5 million would not be a decisive factor for Operation Barbarossa. All in all, Operation Sealion goes down in history as Germany's most significant mistake, contributing greatly to lowering German morale and intensifying distrust between generals, high command, and the Air Force. I'm sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with all the latest releases, consider doing so. Thank you. Now, the second scenario explored is more interesting. It requires that from the very beginning of the war, before even Poland is invaded, the invasion of Britain is on the Germans' mind. The Air Force and the Navy are prepared in a far better way. And after the fall of France, the Luftwaffe singularly focuses on targeting the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy, allowing short-term air superiority over England. Now this, in itself, is already rather unrealistic, but let's stick with it. The inability of the Royal Air Force to project power over the English Channel allows around 75% of planned mines to be laid around the English Channel, a far more serious deterrent against Royal Navy operations. Here, Germany's initial landing is a lot more successful. Around 90,000 out of 120 land on the British Isles, and Britain's initial defense force of 40 destroyers is mostly wiped out attempting to slow the invasion. Meanwhile, Germany's ship losses are cut in half when compared to the previous scenario. Britain here is in far more trouble, as they have to scramble their Royal Navy fast, while Germany manages to consolidate their initial beachhead, and Wave 2 and 3 are ready to be sent across the channel as well. Yet, things aren't as good for Germany as they might look. They have the early advantage, but things will turn around very fast. Britain's home defense was very much not negligible. Forces evacuated from Dunkirk and elsewhere in France already numbered 500,000 of professional soldiers. But that's not all. Even in our timeline, Britain was taking the threat of a German invasion very seriously, let alone in this one, where evidence that the Germans were coming was far greater. The Home Guard was mobilized, which came to a number of 1.5 million volunteers ready to defend the home islands. These of course started off as largely untrained irregulars, but Britain was actually impressively successful in swiftly training up these men and buying them equipment from the United States. It is truly impressive how fast Britain built up this expeditionary force, set up defenses around the country, and started digging out trenches. Britain was showing that they were truly willing to fight as a nation. Churchill's speech were not just some nice words. So, considering the massive British defense force of between 1.5 and 2 million soldiers, the 90,000 that Germany just landed are far less impressive. These 90,000 were also just basic infantry meant to secure beachheads, but unable to swiftly blitz British positions. The second wave would be far more important, as it included a total of 8 panzer and motorized divisions. This second wave is Germany's only chance to potentially make something happen. And its arrival is far from guaranteed. By now, the naval invasion has been ongoing for days. Britain's initial strike force has been destroyed, but new ones are arriving from the north and the south, while Germany's ability to hold them off and defend invasion ships has only weakened for the subsequent waves. On the island, British forces have already surrounded German positions and set up fallback lines. As Germany attempts to send over their panzers, best case scenario, we see a repeat of Wave 1, but more likely, Germany faces even greater losses. Yes, it would be very costly to the Royal Navy too, but Germany's losses are more important. But let's actually be optimistic towards Germany's chances here and say that around 75% of planned panzers and motorized actually reaches Britain. By this point, it is already too late. Germany has long since lost the conflict on the ground. There are no Ardennes maneuvers to pull here and surprise the British with. Some minor pushes might be accomplished, but for most of the front line, World War I era trench warfare sets in. Germany's disadvantage here should be clear, But things are getting even worse. With this level of commitment and initial success, German leadership could very well be unwilling to give up and let the invasion force get captured. Instead, it is very possible that Germany puts whatever they have into doubling down and supplying and reinforcing the invasion via air and sea. Across the following month, Germany's surface fleet and transport boats are wiped out in attempts to resupply the force, foolishly believing that only a minor breakout would be needed to topple the British Empire, while the Luftwaffe commits to airdropping supplies and more paratroopers, further weakening their capabilities, while the Royal Air Force uses the downtime to build new runways and return to full operation. Due to all this, Operation Sealion would become a disaster similar in scale and effect to Stalingrad. In terms of pure troop numbers, let's conservatively say that around 80,000 have died in the English Channel, while around 120,000 were stuck on the British Islands, though these numbers could reach as high as 350,000 total. And I'm not even counting naval and air losses yet. The Luftwaffe is likely even more devastated from this operation than after our timeline's Battle for Britain. And it was for an even less productive goal than the terror bombings were in our timeline. Oh yeah, and obviously, Germany's surface fleet is totally wiped. Now these losses in itself do not destroy German military capabilities, but they are crippling enough that they lead to a crisis in confidence amongst the German command. Internally and internationally, the myth of German invincibility is shattered far earlier, as a climate of distrust between the Navy, Air Force and Army is fostered, each blaming each other for the disaster that was Sealion. Operation Barbarossa would almost certainly need to be delayed by at least a year, as German planning was too focused on Britain for a 1941 execution, while tank and air force capabilities would need to be rebuilt first, and a general, more depressed feeling surrounds Germany's high command about the future of the conflict. Moving up the timeline, Italy and Germany likely do still consolidate the Balkan, controlling most of Europe by 1941. But then, disaster strikes. Across the world, Japan just announced the beginning of the end for the Axis by striking against the Americans. America enters the conflict, first against Japan and then against Germany. Oh, and even if Germany is smart enough to not declare war on the US themselves, the US would have likely joined within weeks anyways. 1942 would be the year with the first significant German losses, as North Africa is invaded and preparations are made for the invasions of Italy and France. You would think that Germany is under enough pressure now, but still, they likely decide to invade the Soviet Union to accomplish their ultimate goal, especially now that they are increasingly paranoid about the Soviets striking first. The Soviets would resist the invasion at least marginally better than in our timeline, with a year longer of preparation and a weaker Germany overall. But Stalin likely still refuses to believe the invasion is coming. I mean, this alternate Germany is not just at war with a crippled Britain, but the US are also involved. Surely, they are not stupid enough to drag in another major enemy. Well, yes they are, very much so. The rest of the war is not that interesting to describe, but by the end of it, Germany would be defeated, potentially faster than in our timeline, with the West managing to occupy more than in our timeline. How this manifests depends on their priorities, but a larger Allied sphere in the Balkan, Austria, Germany, or Czechia are all significant possibilities. In some extreme scenarios, parts of Poland might have even been liberated by the Allies first. But let's back up a little bit and explore some extremes. After Operation Sealion, Germany could very well be hit with a crisis of confidence, especially if they aren't striking against the Soviet Union in 1941, thus have a lot of resources they aren't doing anything with at the moment. Due to this, it is very possible that Germany, hungry for a victory against the British, does something really stupid. Some suggestions for this are Germany committing even harder to North Africa, despite being even less able to keep their forces there supplied, potentially losing even more panzers and other divisions there. Or they might execute on the planned invasion of Spain, another very dumb idea, in hopes of Germany capturing Gibraltar. Even if successful, the guerrilla warfare from both Republican and nationalist Spanish would wear out German occupiers. Meanwhile, yet more coasts now need to be garrisoned, and Portugal either needs to be invaded as well, or an army needs to remain on their border just in case the West pressures them into joining too. Such desperate, short-sighted moves in hopes of regaining lost prestige could further weaken the Germans after such a colossally stupid mistake. For now though, this is the end of the video. Thank you all for watching, and consider leaving a like and a comment as well as subscribing. If you've enjoyed this video, click the video on top to watch another in this series. And if you've already seen it, then I'm sure that the bottom video is great too. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.